Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Sen.
Hi, everyone. And welcome to Gaming in the Yeltsin Years, the remake.
Oh my god, finally.
Episode 1. I'd like everybody to close their eyes. Imagine you're in your house.
The thing is, we're on video now, you can see us.
She wouldn't start until we had our eyes closed. This is the experience. She actually does this.
And all of a sudden, Kirby breaks into your house and eats you.
Oh no.
And as you're taking him to the dimension of Kirby's stomach, you see our special guest. Introduce yourself, special guest.
Oh, you're here too? Oh, I've been here for years trying to survive.
For anyone who's new to the podcast, could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Solid Shook. Yeah, so here at Sinclair Law, or the Snack Covenant, there is a Discord. It's quite active, I'd say, where everyone discusses laws, lots of different channel for different games. So I've mainly been on there since I was a fan. Oh, well, I'd say the reason that I love the podcast from the start is because it has a lighter approach to a lot of things like Dark Souls lore that a lot of channels play sad violin MP3 and try and get to have a lot of storytelling kind of dark, and here it's just goes into it, pulls out the sillier things into the spotlight.
Shook is so a lot of the other podcasts have something interesting to say, but here we have the angelic outline and Jersey Miyazaki.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that stuff. The sprite work, all of it, into my veins. So, anyway, the running jokes seem to be cute things food, Snack Covenant, anti-capitalism,
Lenin.
And I was well, you must be huge Kirby fans. I was mostly a Smash Bros player, and I've had a Game Boy as a kid, so the first games I would have owned would have been Tetris and Kirby's Dreamland and Mario Land.
Mm-hmm.
But Smash is kind of a sister series, and a lot of solid things about Kirby was established there, and so usually if there's a Kirby game that seems interesting, I know I'm going to have a good time because the people who made this game have made some games that I love.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sophie, what's your experience with the Kirby games?
I used to play Kirby's Dreamland a lot, the very first one, because that was on the original Game Boy, and my grandparents used to live about 4 hours drive from me, so every time we were going there, my family and I, we would rent Game Boy games to play in the car, and I just played a lot of Kirby. It's a very short game. Even if, you don't really know what you're doing, it's still only about an hour long. And yeah, I would just play it over and over again. The fact it's very short is very good, because Game Boys did not have very long battery lives.
Did you have the light on the Game Boy and the magnifying glass?
No, because that made it even worse, I think.
Is there any way I could see in the car?
Yeah, I played it a lot. That was the most basic one. Although weirdly, it has a hard mode that you unlock by beating it. That is actually incredibly difficult. I don't think I've ever beaten the hard mode. I've platinumed Sekiro, but I've not beaten the hard mode of Kirby's Dream Boy. And then after that, it sort of developed a lot after that. I didn't play the NES one because the NES was not a thing in Australia, really. But I did play the SNES. Here it was called Kirby's Fun Pack, but I think it's better known as Kirby Superstar, which is basically a collection of smaller games kind of built into one cartridge. Which was a collection of platformers and little mini games and things like that. That I played that a lot, and that's kind of the most Kirby experience I have is with that one.
Yeah, that one's kind of seen as definitive.
Yeah.
Or the one that you should play if you're starting out. Although I think it's probably the most action-packed one.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is that what defines Kirby is that sucking up people and absorbing the powers. And that's not a thing in the first one. He does not gain any, he just spits things out.
He kind of like gets candies and like food and things that can.
It's very. There's like a mint one, and then there's like
Yeah.
a curry or something that you eat it and he breathes fire. But
Yeah.
the concept of like absorbing things didn't come into it. And I actually really like that as a concept. I like Mario's another one where just like characters, instead of getting stronger on like a linear scale, they just have a sort of endlessly morphing set of abilities. So yeah, Kirby appeals to me for that reason.
I played Kirby a while ago when I got my Nintendo DS. It was pretty good.
Might have been Squeak Squad if it was for the DS.
It's the one where he's pink.
Okay.
I also played the more recent one for one of the, I don't know, not PlayStation consoles.
The Nier Automata one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
one.
that one. Okay, yeah.
It's also very good. And okay, I have a really hard time with perspective in games, and I found myself to be really good in Kirby, and then Shurk explained something to me.
Yeah. It's got an amazing camera hitbox system. So if the camera is like kind of at an angle, the hitboxes would stretch out too.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
like a lot of time if you're like hitting things with a hammer and it looks like you hit, it's like the game is like, yeah, you hit.
Yeah.
Which I really want more 3D platformers to do, because like I've never had a problem with like buffering or like coyote time or things that a lot of platformer games do, but like when the camera is slightly off and you fall behind an enemy, like, come on.
Since Kirby is an entity that's been around for a while and has a lot of games, it's hard to talk about it on a very holistic scale. It would take weeks.
Mm.
And that is why we're going to do this in a simpler way, a la What, Where, Why.
You can see you're reaching for a soundboard button.
I can't wait.
Behold, the angelic outline.
And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat upon the cloud, "Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee too."
Here are top 8 Cremaster Cycle fan theories that turned out to be true. Spoiler warning, in effect.
I wish people could have seen Shook's face right now, because as he heard the angelic outline, he's like, oh no, I didn't repent. What do I do?
And then there was a rave.
So, let's start at what? What does Kirby mean?
Well, by mean, I think if you came across the word in everyday life, I see it mostly as a surname. That in Nintendo's games, it would be like Kirby and then title afterwards, and then that would be the game. The name apparently came from a lawyer who defended Nintendo for the use of the name Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
Because Miyamoto, not really having a huge understanding of English, thought that the word donkey meant stupid and Kong meant ape, so just stupid ape, and came with Donkey Kong. But of course, Kong was King Kong's name. It's not, which was licensed by Warner Brothers, I think. So you can't just use that. But they got away with it thanks to a lawyer called John Kirby, I believe.
Is it because he showed up to court and then vored the other side?
Yeah. That was the defense.
When Kirby first was conceptualized, he was called Popopo. I think that's onomatopoeia for the fact he spits things. It's like pop, pop, pop.
Yeah, well, there's a naming convention in Kirby's Dreamland, the first one. So you've got like King Dedede, Castle Low Low Low, and I think Lily. So Kirby would have fit into that. Dreamland isn't called Dreamland in Japanese.
It's called Starland or something, isn't it?
It's called Poo Poo Poo.
Oh, okay.
Boop, boop, boop.
So I reckon if
Aw.
you called it Poo 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 in English, people are like, oh. And that might have been why they changed it.
It always struck me as one of those things that's like, if this had happened the other way around, no one would believe it. We're recording this about Popopo, and it's like, did you know they almost called this thing Kirby? It's like, what?
Now, what was the creation process behind Kirby?
Yeah, so luckily there's been more videos talking about this from Sakurai, but creating the Kirby's Dreamland game, it was very much like, what do we need this character to do? And they were like kind of designing the character around the things that he does. So they needed a character that, like, the inhale mechanic and the shoot out mechanic was always there. He wanted the game to be a bit more forgiving than most platformers at the time, where you get hit, you'd knock off a cliff and you die. It's like, we want you to be able to fly back up. So they didn't really have the character ready for when they were programming the game, so they kind of just had this circle blodge of like programmer art, even though there was a separate team that was supposed to be designing the character, and everyone liked it. It's just a little happy thing, and it was quite adaptable. Like changes form a lot in the first game as well, even though there aren't transformations yet. And yeah, they stuck with it. They just discarded all the work the art team were doing, presumably. None of which we've seen. Like when you see like Sonic the Hedgehog, you see like, oh, Mr. Needle Mouse, and like, you know, Eggman was the original character. We've seen nothing of what Kirby could have been. I wouldn't have been surprised if he ended up a bit like DDD as like a kind of bird thing, because like King DDD, who's like kind of the frenemy villain, has a lot of the same powers in the first game anyway. Not like copy abilities, but like, yeah, we never saw any of that.
Yeah, and that works with the power set because it's very simple, so it can just become anything.
Yeah, lots of spin-offs can come from that. And I think as well, like there were different creators at the same time, because like different basically strands of Kirby game were being made at the same time. So around Superstar, there was also Dreamland 2 and Dreamland 3, which were being directed by a guy called he disappeared off the face of the planet. So we're gonna like after Kirby 64, Shinichi Shimomura, I think, and yeah, they were like diverting paths for him. So the one that kind of won is like the copy ability, like action hero kind of thing, but his was more like had animal friends. It was a bit more cutesy. Still had some serious like dark, not like serious, but like 1,000 Years of Darkness villain kind of stuff. But his Kirby was a bit different. And I think when we have the new director or the new games, I think they're pulling back more from there now. And like, but yeah, there was a lot of different people making Kirby at the same time. But like Sakurai is known as the creator. Yeah. And he still established a lot of Kirby lore through the Smash Bros. Games. Like the first game to give Kirby a voice was Kirby 64. Smash 64, which is before Kirby 64.
Yeah, get that right.
I must have the fact completely backwards.
Yeah. I guess that the thing that we should clarify is like Kirby's a Nintendo character. He's not made by Nintendo, the company. He's made by HAL, who is like something that Nintendo basically owned.
Yeah, they're almost one and the same to the point where they bring employees to work on HAL games. HAL to work on Nintendo.
It's like, it's like HAL do the Smash Brothers games, and
they did until the last one was Melee, and then Sakurai took it. But like they made Earthbound, and I think most importantly, Iwata, who was Nintendo's last president, was president of HAL. And they had like some deal to make him the president of Nintendo. I forgot exactly how that went, but he was a very good programmer, and he could probably be credited to the whole copy ability thing.
Oh wow!
He's like reading his book, like that came out posthumously. He mentioned that he sees himself as a programmer who would never say no. So like when you're making an NES game, you're lucky to have like a punch and a kick or like some simple moves. And then like coming up with Kirby's Dreamland, it's like, all right, we want Kirby to have all these moves, all these abilities. He can change his movement entirely by absorbing something. And I think if there was any other programmer than Iwata, he would like, Sakurai, you are insane. I am a humble programmer. Please leave me alone. But he was able to do it. He enjoyed the challenge, and it was quite late in the NES life cycle, so they were very good at making games for it then.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, a very important question that we all want to know about.
Okay.
What is Kirby's consistency?
Well, he seems to be made of air, and he can inhale more air to make himself like larger and lighter and fly.
So bubblegum.
Yeah, I think bubblegum is probably a good way of explaining it. And when he moves, he tends to make little cute anime pop 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 noises, like little air balloon noises.
Okay.
I think he kind of came a bit more solid when he had like copy abilities and he'd like kind of spawn a hat on top of him. Sakurai came out and said that was because of like the co-op mode to make it more obvious who the co-op character would be. And the other side, he didn't always do that, or at least Kirby 64, which came out after that, also didn't do it. And he was more like transforming. So if you play Kirby 64 and you get like the boomerang ability, if you were playing like a Sakurai game, you'd expect him to get like a little boomerang and like throw the boomerang, or like get like, I don't know, an Australian hat or something like that. In Kirby 64, he would rip off his face and throw it.
Yeah.
And
Oh wow.
or if he gets like a spike ability, he would just grow a giant spike out of his head,
Yeah.
or something like that.
And once
I remember
he was Jan.
Yeah. Oh, that game's beautiful.
Yeah.
Kirby's Epic Yarn. I still don't even know how that game works. Like, am I looking at sprites or polygons? I don't know. It's just so good looking. But in the spin-off game, he became Wool.
Yeah.
And yeah.
He was a golf ball once?
Yes.
Yes.
And I suppose like the last game, Kirby could like kind of stretch himself out and take over a car or a vending machine.
Yeah, it was intense.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, this is a question Shook was really interested in, and I didn't think about before.
Ooh.
What is Kirby's gender?
So, I think Sakurai has said a couple of times, usually in response to fans, that it's like unknown. And I was trying to find examples of pronouns being used in the Japanese versions, because in the English versions, it's always been like Kirby is a sprightly little boy that appeared and like offered to rescue everyone. In the Japanese version, you don't tend to use pronouns anywhere near as much as you do in English. The instruction manual, however, like says like wakamono, which means like a youth. But the examples where Kirby has talked, Kirby uses like boku as a first-person pronoun, which the Japanese get to use. But like you can see them kind of as gender expression, but a lot of time it's kind of mood expression. Girls do use them. But I think as the series went on, it's just kind of been like I think maybe because of male creators or like becoming more of an action game series, like it's kind of became that way, and like more characters call him like hare in Japanese, which is like a male pronoun. But there's also been like a couple of promotional material, like the Valentine's Day promotion, where Japan has a different way of celebrating Valentine's Day, where they have like White Day and Valentine's Day, where like the girls would get presents for the boys, and then next week the boys would return a favor. And Kirby was in both of those. So it's kind of like a fluid sort of thing, and still is.
Yeah.
Kind of like our characters. Although we default oftentimes to like he, because I think in English and in Russian, just when you talk, that's kind of what people tend to default to.
Yeah.
But Brutus doesn't really have a gender. The little slug, I don't think.
Yeah, this again, there's a reason why I think Kirby is quite similar to one of the Snack Covenant characters. He fits in perfectly. We don't know what species Kirby is or anything about his biology. It's just it's it's a curious point about the character.
Next question is, what is the gender of the angelic outline?
Hello everybody, I hope you're enjoying this discussion of Kirby. Kirby is an important role model, so remember to follow his example. Stretch yourself, consume fluids, and most importantly, be kind to one another. Also oppose colonialism. Back to the podcast.
Now, let's move on to where. Where is Kirby born?
Dreamland.
We don't know.
Oh, Sophie said Dreamland. Are you saying she's wrong?
Well, what is it's just created out of dreams?
Yeah, well...
Oh my god, like the moon presence?
That's what I was thinking.
Yes!
Late at night, I think of you, your vision floods my mind.
So, Kirby has been described as appearing in a spring breeze. And that goes back to the very first game on the instruction manual, the Japanese version, Haru Kaze, which you wouldn't think is significant, so it wasn't translated. It's just like Kirby shows up on something and then like sounds poetic, cool. And then you have in Kirby Superstar the remake of the first game, which is called Kirby Spring Breeze. Mm-hmm. And then I think some of the trophies or the figures in Rainbow Curse said like that's when he first appeared. So we don't know what he was before that. We know that he probably didn't have anything to do with Dreamland. Like a lot of the plots of the early games have been like a lot of characters going like, who the hell are you?
Mhm.
But we don't know if he had a life before that. I don't think there's been any sort of prequel game. There's been some little clues, but that's certainly been where he lives. And like, there's been some artwork where he's described as a traveler, but we haven't really seen any of that. It's just all of the games he lives in Dreamland. But yeah,
Because in the first Game Boy one, when you beat it, there's like a whole lot of little Kirbys at the end.
yeah,
So I'm just like, oh, this is just the species that lives there.
yeah. And also, he can like you find them as power ups in the game.
Yeah.
They're like kind of dancing around, and you like pick it up, and it'll kill all the enemies on the
Also,
screen.
Kirby like splits into different Kirbys, and then it's like,
Yeah, he commits mitosis.
Yeah.
This little dance of himself, and then presumably goes back together. We don't see that. It usually fades out.
but he also spawns other creatures from his body. I feel like Dreamland is like if the Moon Presence appeared and made a universe for Sin, and it was just like a series of simple shapes and food everywhere.
Oh
Yeah.
my god.
And an evil penguin that steals them.
Yes.
Oh, that penguin would get eaten.
That's why this is like the Moon Presence appeared, and you're like, I have a vision. And it rains lollipops, and there's a penguin.
Where does Kirby currently live?
So, should probably talk about the geography of Dreamland. So, Dreamland is a place, is like a country or region within planet Popstar, which is called a planet, but it's like a star. It's a giant star.
Is that where the Spice Girls retire?
What I like is that's now on the soundtrack. We can't get rid of it.
Yeah, so Planet Popstar is in what has been referred to literally once as the Gumball Galaxy. And there are also a lot of games where you, like Kirby 64, where you kind of leave this planet and go to different planets. And some of them are quite interesting. Like, some of them are just like, you know, a lava planet, a sea planet in Kirby 64. One of them is a freeze planet, an ice planet, which
Ooh.
has the texture of the Earth on it, so that you can see like Africa and America and that kind of thing. It's like, and you go there and it's just like a frozen wasteland.
Wow.
Or it's got like a shopping mall in it, and you go further down and there's like robots. It like gives you an idea of what happened here. And,
Yeah.
like, and there's also games where you go to different dimensions, which also have a planet. They're not like a version of Popstar. It's like this is a different place with different planets on it.
Yeah.
Similar to maybe Dreamlands and Bloodborne, I don't know, but not really.
There's also the weird dream metaverse that happens in Link's Awakening, which, like before, that's the Zelda game I played the most because it was on Game Boy. So Link's Awakening is also set in the Dreamlands. And in it, you meet Wart from Mario Brothers 2, which was a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And Kirby is also kind of in it. Not by name, but there is an obvious Kirby sprite as one of the enemies.
Yeah,
Okay.
it'll
Yes.
inhale you.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to kill, I remember.
Yeah.
There's also a shared sort of dark mirror universe, I think, with Zelda. I think they have a lot in common, and you could almost say they might be one and the same, but they have similar themes. So one that's quite interesting, like Kirby and Amazing Mirror, is that like there are evil versions of characters. So there's like a dark Meta Knight. There is also a dark Kirby, but dark Kirby isn't evil. It's just cowardly. Like you show up, it'll get like a boss bar, and then you hit it once, it's like, oh, and just run off.
Okay.
But the thing is, like, whenever Zelda's done like a dark universe, like Termina,
Yeah.
the dark character that represents Link hasn't really ever been evil, like unless like Dark Link. But like say Majora's Mask, like the equivalent in that was Tingle, and Tingle's just a bit of an asshole who,
Yeah.
like, he's not really saving the day. He's using the opportunity to sell maps and make money.
So you know what this is? The Dark Universe is actually based on RuPaul's Drag Race
Yes.
because
37
RuPaul-
minutes, 32 seconds to first RuPaul reference.
because RuPaul talks about how we have our inner saboteur that we have to sort of, combat. And RuPaul's inner saboteur, is Rude Paul. It's good that Kirby is a fan of RuPaul's Drag Race. I appreciate that.
I'm sure he is. Yeah, definitely. But like, usually when you find like an evil mirror universe, you think of like Star Trek, and like they have mustaches, and they're like they're doing something.
They have mustaches.
Yeah.
Yes.
They have like Spock with a mustache who's like...
He's the
running
evil
everything.
Spock. He has a mustache.
So there's a universe out there where all of us are having the same podcast, the same conversations, but we have little curly mustaches.
Yeah.
Okay,
that
you
last
want to
Star
know
Trek
the
show.
fucked up thing? You want to know the fucked up thing?
Yeah.
If there actually are an infinite number of multiverses, that is true because it is infinite.
Ooh.
There is another
Yeah.
where literally everything is happening.
You can't just say like some
Yeah.
of the universes this happened because some of
Yeah.
infinite is also infinite.
Yes.
So weird things happen.
So this isn't episode 1 of Gaming in the Yeltsin Years. It's like episode infinity.
Maybe.
It's like
We're definitely in the monkey
this is like
typewriter.
Haruhi Suzumiya stuff. We need to move on.
Where do the things that Kirby eats go?
Well, in the first game, and I think in most of the games, when you eat something, you just shoot it out, it becomes a star, it'll hit something, and it'll go. The enemy's defeated, it's dead. I don't know. Or you can press down, and Kirby does a crouch, and then gets back up, and the enemy, he's not inhaling the enemy anymore. They're just gone. I don't know what Kirby's done.
So, do you think on the planets where Kirby has visited, he's like wanted for murder?
Potentially, I mean, Christ, I don't know how many people he would have killed, but I mean, it's a basic video game mechanic of like, if an enemy is like an obstruction, you kill the enemy and you get past. It's not like meant to be like completely violent thing. It's just like a challenge that you overcome. But I think in Kirby games, I was like, oh, they're becoming a star, they're becoming one with the universe, whatever. They might get better. I don't know. But then we've since had, like, since the Kirby lore became a thing, we've had characters die and be grieved for. So, like, death is
Aw.
definitely a thing in these games.
Oh, wow.
And there are also characters that have, like, singular names, like Mr. Frosty or something like that. And it kind of, you kind of think, like, oh, it's the same character come back, Mr. Frosty's back. But then you, like, fight 2 Mr. Frostys, and it's like, oh. Yeah.
Is Mr. Frosty played by Arnold
Oh, I
Schwarzenegger?
wish. Nice to meet you, Kirby. There's also the Superstar one, Meta Knight's Revenge, where it's got like a ship, and it's like
Yes.
you get like dialogue coming up in the bottom
Yeah.
of like the characters being fearing for their lives because Kirby's rampaging through the ship, and they're like, "Oh
It's
no,
so
he's on the
good.
West Wing!"
Aw.
And like the way the games are paced, they're amazing. But that one in particular is so
Yeah.
good because like
Yeah.
we're gonna cut off half the ship to get rid of him, and like or something like that. But they seem to have mortal fear
Yeah.
from what's
Yeah.
happening. But yeah, just don't mess with him. He doesn't want to cause harm. It's just
You know what, Shook? You sound a lot like a Kirby apologist right now.
oh, I am. He's just a boy. He's trying to save his friends.
Speaking of which, tell me about his friends.
Oh, of course. So, I suppose like the main frenemy who I mentioned earlier is King Dedede, and in Kirby's Dreamland, the plot of that game is King Dedede is like an unruly king, and he takes everyone's food for himself, and Kirby's like, that's not on, and takes them back. And in the second game, Kirby realizes he hasn't had any good dreams recently, so he finds out that the Star Rod at the Fountain of Dreams has been split up into 7 pieces and handed around throughout Planet Popstar. And when you gather them all together and go to the end, it turns out that this is actually a plan to prevent the Nightmare character from like escaping from the Fountain of Dreams and turning the world into darkness or whatever.
Yeah.
But King Dedede's plan was like one of defense, but he didn't involve Kirby in it. And I think this is part of the thing of like Kirby probably didn't exist in this world before the events of like the first game, because he would have been involved in that plan. But this is like country politics. You can't just have some guy be involved in like planetary defense. So since then, King Dedede is a friend. He's just probably the most possessed character out of any character in history. He's always getting like mind controlled by villains, and you have to fight him. And his personality's kind of changed a bit as the games go on as well.
What is he?
Seems to
Because
be a
there's
penguin.
I know that
Don't
there's
know.
like it's like there's the penguin camp and the duck camp, and I don't know if it's ever been
Yeah.
resolved.
He's also got a big belly, like
Yeah.
stripes on it. Looks
Got to
like
be
a
a
drum.
hammer.
Yeah,
Fight you in a
had that-
wrestling ring.
Oh yeah, gets a big mask. Will
Yeah.
fight you. Holds a bit of a grudge. He's also had a bit of a redesign recently. There's a remake coming out of Kirby's Return to Dreamland, and he looks like his Kirby 64 form. But for a while, he had like the same sort of look, and then the last game, Forgotten Lands, kind of redesigned him. He's like a lot bigger. His face is a bit smaller, and he's like a lot more expressive. And he looks great. But yeah, he's a good character. And the other friend mainly is Meta Knight, who began in Kirby's Dreamland. Kirby's Adventure as one of the characters that got a piece of the Star Rod, and he fights you honorably. He gives you a sword if you don't have one, and he fights you mana. And he's also had like moments of trying to take over Dreamland. Just a bit of cheeky, gets in a massive halberd, gets sick of everyone. I'm gonna leave. But for the most part, he has a role in the kingdom as like a kind of protector. In the anime, he's got like an Antonio Banderas Puss in Boots kind of voice, I've got to say. But like he's like an honorable knight guy, and like also protagonist since then. Yeah. You got Bandana D as the co-op character in a lot of games.
Gooey?
Gooey, of course.
Gooey.
Gooey's very interesting. He's only been in 2 games, I think. One of them was the playable co-op character.
Yeah.
And he's got like similar abilities to Kirby in like copy abilities and like kind of being stretchy. Uses his tongue instead of inhaling to like take enemies in and do whatever they do with them. But he hasn't really shown up since. And he's had like, a couple of cameo appearances like in pictures or like in the statue abilities and that kind of thing. But he is pretty much dark matter, which is a huge part of Kirby lore. And there's also like little animal friends. There's a character that's sort of implied to be Kirby's girlfriend in Dreamland 3, like Choo Choo. Yeah, like a little umbrella thingy. Like,
she's like a little Kirby umbrella with a bow.
Yeah. So he's got a lot of friends, I'd say. Not as much into the center mechanic as Kirby's Dreamland 3 had and 2, but yeah.
Thank you. Now let's move on to the pièce de résistance of the outline. Why is Kirby?
Okay, so I'd say that up until Return to Dreamland on the Wii, there was a bit of making it up as they go along, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I think most of the lore that we have today came from Superstar. It was this nova wish-granting planet that appears, and you need to use it to get the sun and the moon to stop fighting. And it kind of talks like a computer. It's got like a terminal less than symbol whenever it talks, and it's like you're interfacing with it. But it's also got like things sticking out of it, like I think there's a compass in there, like scissors, like weird scientific apparatuses that look very kind of humanly, like as a clue. But I think it was just, you're not meant to think about it too much, but it looks a bit like a Around the World in 80 Days kind of thing, if you know what I mean. Like French sci-fi. I think since then the games have kind of like took into explaining that a little bit. The other thing I mentioned as well that this kind of gets into is dark matter. And dark matter is in Kirby's Dreamland 2, 3, and 64 are known as a dark matter trilogy. And the main reason for that is because the villain in that is like basically this weird dark matter thing. It's a terrible way of explaining it, but it turns into an eyeball. It possesses characters, like possesses King Dedede, and Gooey seems to be one of them that's turned good. There's little hints of that about in places. So like some of the bosses use dark matter attacks, and I think the biggest one, I think I'll get into spoilers for this game because I don't think it's great, but like Star Allies has the biggest clue of what Kirby is. Because in that game, you're basically following around a death cult that is like is trying to resurrect some old god that is trapped inside a heart. And the thing that's interesting about it is that when you fight it, it's like this big, like, kind of bird thing, and you fight in this 3D attack mode, and you eventually like open up its heart and you go inside it, and there's this like gooey thing on the inside, and it kind of turns into dark matter shapes, and it also turns into Kirby's face at times, and you hear like a remix of like the Green Greens theme tune in its song. It's kind of implied that this might be Kirby's race. This might be what Kirby is. And there was an ancient civilization that was like split into two, a magic side and a science side, and they worked together to seal this away. And it could be that like Kirby is like the opposite of this. This is like the dark version. This is like the evil one. But like we've seen that it has similar abilities. Like Kirby also has like a sort of mind control thing in this game. Like he can throw a heart at people and they just become your ally.
Aww.
Like enemies as well. Like fair enough for Waddle Dees, but like creatures he has just met. And then you kind of get into like, okay, so what is this heart? Like this heart has appeared all over the series. Like, is this actually a symbol of the ancients? Is this a symbol of like control, of like they use it to tie down enemy, like the void creature? But yeah, that's the biggest clue we've had, that this dark matter thing Kirby is very related to. But yeah, there's also lots of examples of Kirby fighting nightmare, dream dimension creatures. I think most infamously, he when someone stole his strawberry shortcake, he went on a big journey to go find it and ended up Wild Goose Chase. Just ends up fighting some elder god. And I think the strange thing is we don't always know how strong Kirby is when doing this. You're not sure if he actually had like a power boost from something, or if he just fought these creatures and won. Mm-hmm. So like a lot of games have MacGuffins, like collect the 7 things and this will power up Kirby, or like someone gives him an item before fighting the final boss and he'll get like super powerful. But we started to like lose track of this, and it's like, oh, Kirby is just fighting these gods and winning.
Thank you, Shook. To end this podcast, since we are cool people who are in the know,
mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a bit about the newest Kirby game that just came out?
Yeah, I was saying earlier, it's a fantastic game, and it's probably one of my favorite games ever at this point now. It's so good. It's I would say that if you were following the game before its release, or like during its release, they always promote Kirby games as like for kids, and like they keep saying like, oh, we don't want to see Kirby getting hurt, so we don't make it too difficult. But towards the end of the game, I definitely died quite a lot, and like there's always challenges in them as well. So like get through a level without being hit. But like I would definitely say it's a good game for everyone, and like ignore what the creators are saying. And it's had some of the biggest lore dumps in a long time as well.
And if people like Kirby, what kind of games should they be playing?
So if you have a 3DS, there is a very, very rare Game Boy game you can download called Trip World. And Trip World is a game that's very similar to Kirby, that you play as a kind of amorphous blob, and you shift between different forms. But you don't get it by absorbing things, you just have them mapped to the D-pad. Like you just press buttons and you turn into something. And yeah, that's a game that like, it was extremely rare. The cartridge was worth like hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Even loose. And now it's just on the 3DS. So people can finally play it. It's even easier than the Kirby games. Like it is a massive pushover. And it is the kind of spiritual successor to, I think, a much better known game called Gimmick. Gimmick was an NES game that, like, it had a Kirby-esque aesthetic of, like, you're a little weird little monster thing in, like, a sort of cartoon world. But it was incredibly difficult, and it had an extremely well-programmed physics engine. So, yeah, it sort of blindsided a lot of people, didn't really get the audience it deserved, because it had the aesthetic of being a game for children, but it's far too hard for children. Yeah, so Trip World is sort of the successor to that in some ways, in that it's like some of the same people, it looks kind of similar, but it's incredibly easy, to the point where it's pretty much a pushover. But I mean, if you do like Kirby, Trip World's pretty good.
I remember Gimmick having some stuff like if you followed a load of birds, you'd find where their nest was and just things like that.
No, and there's like a
world detail.
There's like a level that, like, if you go through it fast enough, the boss is still asleep when you get to the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say like similar games. HAL has made like Kirby games without Kirby, like Box Boy, and they have part-time UFO. Because one of the abilities you get as Kirby is UFO, but I think they didn't use him because they were on the phone. They might not have been able to get a license for it.
I think if you like Kirby, the game you should start with should be Action 52. Sophie, do the outro.
That was Gaming in the Yeltsin Years, the reboot, Episode 1, Kirby with Solid Shook.
Thanks for having me. This is amazing.
Shook has very low standards. And Shook, if people want to find you on social media, where should they look for you?
Oh, probably in your Discord, I would say. At Twitter, at Solid Shook on Twitter, I'd say. But, yeah, I think I just like to be there for anyone else that enjoys the podcast and wants to talk about the games that are discussed here. And like, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Shook.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. And see y'all next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao, Sue. What?
Ciao, Sue.
Ciao, Sue.
Thank you.